This video is made possible by NordVPN. If you are online, you really must be using a VPN, and that's where NordVPN comes in. I know it's tempting not to bother and hope for the best, but really, those stories you read about people having their data stolen do happen, and you don't want to make it that easy for anyone to do that. But using a VPN offers more than just security. For example, NordVPN lets you access any of its thousands of servers in different countries around the globe. So if you've hit the end of your Netflix queue, simply try changing the location of your server and get access to content libraries that, due to licensing agreements, are only available in specific geographic locations. For example, most European countries have strong licensing agreements restricting which soccer matches can be viewed depending on the location of the viewer. With NordVPN, you can change your country without even moving from your sofa. NordVPN is super fast, so watching a video is a breeze. No lag whatsoever. If you've ever used VPNs and thought they were slow, well, no more with NordVPN. And you can use it on all your devices very, very easily. Android, Chrome, Windows, Linux, and on up to 6 different devices. One account. Also, there are no logs kept at all, unlike companies based in the EU or US. NordVPN is based in Panama, so they don't have to keep logs at all. Great for your privacy. So, take control of your internet experience right now. Go to nordvpn.com/VisualPolitik and use the code VisualPolitik to get 70% off a 3-year plan with an extra month thrown in for free. And now, let's get into it. In 2020, almost every country in the world is going to suffer a huge recession from the pandemic of the new SARS coronavirus 2. Will all of them struggle? No. There is a select club of countries that, in principle, will benefit. And everything indicates that the biggest winner of this pandemic is going to be none other than Vietnam. I know the first word that comes to your mind when you hear Vietnam is war. The Vietnam War. In the 1960s, thousands of young Americans left for this country with their military boots and rifles. But the story has an ironic twist. Because now, 65 years after all that, the grandchildren of those young people are returning to Vietnam. Although this time they are dressed in ties and armed with tablets and laptops. Yes, friends of VisualPolitik, Vietnam is on trend. We could say it's the new China. In fact, many companies that had factories in China are already moving much of their business to Vietnam. This process was already happening before the coronavirus hit, but the pandemic has accelerated this trend. And we're not talking about small businesses either. Listen up.
Samsung shifts some smartphone production to Vietnam due to coronavirus.
And yes, much of this change is because Vietnam has been one of these countries that has best managed the pandemic. That's right. Here on this channel, we have detailed how countries such as South Korea, Taiwan, or the Czech Republic could be used as examples of how to manage the pandemic. Perhaps you haven't heard about Vietnam's progress, but the truth is they've done surprisingly well. We're talking about a relatively poor country with more than 95 million inhabitants that shares a border with China. So how many deaths would you say they've had? Well, the answer is 0. Exactly. At the time of making this video, Vietnam has not had any deaths from COVID-19. What's more, one of the videos the government has released about public health information has gone viral. And no wonder. Take a look. But this whole story goes far beyond the coronavirus. Vietnam has been growing and attracting companies for decades. In fact, here's a very curious fact. Vietnam is a communist dictatorship, much like China. However, Vietnamese society is a supporter of the free market in the world. At least, that's what a Pew Research Center survey carried out in 2015 says. And it makes a lot of sense. More and more companies are setting up in Vietnam. Furniture, clothing, shoe factories. To give you an idea, 1 out of every 2 pairs of Adidas sneakers are labeled made in Vietnam. And this is funny because 10 years ago, half of Adidas's production was in China. The change has been very rapid. And I know what many of you are going to tell me. Let's see, Josh, that's not necessarily an improvement. That's just swapping one sweatshop for another. We all know the textile industry doesn't pay good wages. Look at Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the mecca of the fashion industry, but they have been anchored in poverty for decades. And yes, you're right. The textile industry is a low value added industry. But unlike Bangladesh, Vietnam is already starting to make technology. Technological products certainly have added value and much higher salaries. And you'll say, made in Vietnam? What kind of technology is made in Vietnam? Well, for starters, these gadgets that many of you will be using right now.
Apple is reportedly starting to build some of its AirPods in Vietnam.
To give you an idea, in the last 10 years, Vietnam's GDP has doubled, and this extra cash flow has resulted in real improvements for the lives of all the Vietnamese. As an example, unlike the Chinese, 97% of Vietnamese have health coverage. It is true that wages are still low, but it is also true that there is official protective housing and all sorts of programs to reduce poverty. Cities like Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon have impressive skylines filled with skyscrapers, and even the slums have much better infrastructure than other countries like Bangladesh or India. So the question is, what's going on in Vietnam? How is it possible that a country that was once at war with the United States has integrated so well into the world's market? How is it possible that they will benefit so greatly from the coronavirus? Today, we're going to answer these questions, but first, let's look at some history.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Few wars have inspired more movies and more songs than the Vietnam War. We've all seen Apocalypse Now. We've listened to Creedence Clearwater Revival. And if you haven't, I honestly don't know what you're doing with your life. Seriously. Yet, all of that is coming from the American view of the war. What I'm sure you don't know so well is how the Vietnamese lived during and after the war. And believe me, it's a much sadder story than any Nam movie you've already seen. Whilst it's true that Vietnam won the war, the country was completely destroyed. Between 1 million and 3 million Vietnamese lost their lives. And unlike World War II, Vietnam had no Marshall Plan. Obviously, the US wasn't going to help them rebuild. By that time, the Soviet Union had more important things to worry about than a country that they hardly knew was on the map. To make matters worse, the Vietnamese government was not exactly an example of responsible management. Ho Chi Minh had died during the war, and his successors made even Stalin look like a moderate politician. To give you an idea, within just a few years, the Vietnamese Communist Party expropriated all farmland, and it put more than 250,000 South Vietnamese in re-education camps. But it doesn't end there. Many of you probably think that all communist countries get along, right? Well, you're wrong. During the 1980s, Vietnam and Cambodia went to war. Cambodia was supported by China. Basically, China ended up attacking Vietnam. In other words, it was as if the war with the United States was not enough. The Vietnamese suffered 2 wars for the price of 1. As you can imagine, by 1986, the country was a real ecce homo. Famine, hyperinflation, and extreme poverty. And that's when the Communist Party convened a meeting. As with China, the younger politicians told the older ones this.
We have made mistakes due to leftist infantilism, idealism. These mistakes were manifested in maintaining the bureaucracy's centralized mechanism of economic management. Truong Chin, Vietnamese communist politician.
And this is how the Doi Moi program was born, the Great Vietnamese Reform. Basically, the Doi Moi was something similar to the opening of China, but on steroids. Unlike China, Vietnam did not make special economic zones. They made it national, and in 10 years, they changed the whole country from top to bottom. To give you an idea, in 1986, having a company, even if it was a family farm, was forbidden. 10 years later, Nike was already opening its first factories on Vietnamese soil. And I know what you're thinking, right? We've seen this story before. Basically, it's the same thing that happened in China, isn't it? What makes Vietnam so special? Let's look at that right now.
Like China, but with low tariffs.
If you have a company and want to open a factory, Vietnam has 2 unbeatable advantages over China: lower salaries and a younger population. We have already explained this in other videos. The one-child policy in China has resulted in a very lopsided aging society. In Vietnam, they did the opposite. The government gave all kinds of aid for families that have many children. As a result, almost all Vietnamese are of working age. Meanwhile, north of the border, Chinese salaries are getting higher. For example, today, a Shenzhen worker is paid equivalent to one in Hungary. So what usually happens in these cases? Well, China specializes in high value-added tasks. That is, they start producing their own smartphones, their own drones, and their own electric cars. Things that require workers with education, and the more mechanical jobs are outsourced to Vietnam. That explains news headlines like this.
Yarn giant Texhong to invest $500 million in Vietnam.
Exactly. The first step in Vietnam's development was to become China's China. At this point, this was not anything that we hadn't seen in other countries. However, things changed in 2018, specifically on the 5th of July 2018.
Trump's trade war with China is officially underway.
That's when Trump started putting tariffs on Chinese products. China responded with more tariffs on US products. And in the meantime, many companies that had factories on Chinese soil started to wonder, where else could we go? And the answer was crystal clear: Vietnam. It's right next door to China. In fact, many companies have circumvented the US tariffs by exporting goods from Vietnam. For example, imagine you're a Chinese steel producer. If you send steel beams directly to the United States, you have to pay a 25% tariff. But there's a loophole. You can send the beams to Haiphong port. You relabel your goods made in Vietnam and hey presto, you can ship it to Los Angeles duty-free. Of course, this practice, what is known as transshipping, is beginning to be banned. But many exporters have been taking advantage of this loophole until very recently. But cheating aside, there are also many legitimate businesses that are beginning to see Vietnam as their new China. And we're not talking about shoe factories anymore. We're talking about much more important goods.
Google to shift Pixel smartphone production from China to Vietnam.
Of course, this is not the first smartphone factory to be set up in Vietnam. Nokia had factories there for years. But this is just one example. Samsung, Apple, and many other companies are already doing the same thing. Vietnamese mobile phone brands are even emerging. Even more in their favor is the fact that Vietnam has many political advantages. In a way, we could say that they are in the same place that China was before Xi Jinping arrived. A country that is increasingly opening up to the world. A communist dictatorship, yes, but where almost all decisions are made in a collective manner by the party. Or if you like, today, Xi Jinping is China's most undisputed leader. He has almost unlimited power. In Vietnam, there is a general secretary of the Communist Party, a prime minister, a party president, and a communist assembly. Of course, they all belong to the same party, but some are controlling the others. It's still a dictatorship, but a much softer one than China's, and that shows in small details. For example, Vietnamese people can watch YouTube videos. Obviously, many videos are censored, but the platform is totally legal. What's more, there are Vietnamese YouTubers. Probably even this video will be able to be viewed in Vietnam. The same goes for Facebook, Google, and any other internet company. To give you an idea, whilst China is increasingly protectionist, Vietnam is making deals like this.
EU-Vietnam. Council gives final green light to free trade agreement. Free trade agreement between the Eurasian Economic Union and Vietnam to enter force on October 5th, 2016.
But all this was happening before the pandemic, and we promised that this video would be about how Vietnam is the great beneficiary of the coronavirus, right? Well, right now, we're going to see why.
The coronavirus winners.
We said it even at the beginning of this video. Even though it's growing, Vietnam is still a poor country. If China has a per capita income of $20,000, Vietnam's is only around $8,600. However, the Vietnamese government has managed to ensure health coverage for 97% of the population. Because of that, the government, despite being a dictatorship, has been very transparent with everything that it is linked with the coronavirus. From day one, they launched all sorts of campaigns to inform citizens why they had to wear masks, the correct method for washing hands, and why it was important to stay at home. Conclusion: to date, Vietnam has 334 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 0 deaths. That's what I said. These results are impressive on their own, but considering that they share a border with China, they are truly worthy of applause. But we're not just talking about health, we're also talking about economics.
China Plus One strategy could help to keep supply chains robust.
Basically, if there's one thing that we've learned from the pandemic, it's that it's not good to depend on a single country to produce things. And we're not just talking about mobile phones. For example, 95% of the ibuprofen consumed in the United States comes from China. It's a similar story with other things like masks. So when something like a pandemic arrives, all the production disappears into thin air. We'll explain this further in another video, but stick with this concept. China Plus One. That is, okay, we have a supplier in China, but we're going to have another one as a backup in another country, just in case. Companies are already taking note, and so are governments.
Japan sets aside 243.5 billion yen to help firms shift production out of China.
All this helps explain why we are seeing so many companies moving part of their production to Vietnam in 2020, from Google to Microsoft. If you notice, we're no longer talking about Nike or Adidas. In other words, we're no longer talking about workshops with cheap labor. Increasingly, we are seeing technology companies opening factories in this region. That means better skilled, better paid jobs. And I know what many of you are thinking. Oh my god, Vietnam is paradise! Now, all those companies that once went to China are going to go like sheep to Vietnam. Not really. Of course not. In principle, Vietnam still has a lot of problems. Think about it. China has been the world's factory for decades. That means that it is currently very easy to find skilled workers there. People who have studied at universities and who know how to produce high value added goods. In addition, China already has luxury infrastructures and suppliers of all kinds. Vietnam is many years away from reaching that level. And of course, other countries like Thailand now also have an opportunity to join the trend. In other words, Vietnam needs to invest much more in education and building roads. Moreover, we must not forget that the country is still a dictatorship, with all the political risks that this entails. But right now, we can say that while almost every nation is facing a recession, Vietnam is one of the few exceptions and will continue to grow. So now the question is over to you. Is this going to be Vietnam's decade? How long will it take before we see Vietnamese tourists walking through our cities? Can Vietnam become a democracy? Or will they follow in China's footsteps? You can leave me your answer in the comments. And as always, don't forget that we upload new videos every week. So subscribe to VisualPolitik and make sure that you don't miss any of our updates. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And of course, if you liked this video, give it a like, and I'll see you in the next one.